Good evening. It's Monday night, the 29th of April. Preached yesterday at church on Isaiah 61, which talks about oil of joy for mourning and garment of praise. And it's quite a positive chapter. And just wanted to encourage the church. You know, there's stuff been happening around the world. And it's a good, if you want to read an encouraging verse, I'd recommend Isaiah 61, 1-3. Just talks about hope and turning beauty into ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, and garment of praise for a spirit of heaviness. Just to combat all the, bad news that's been happening around the world. But one of the questions after the service, I was talking to some of the congregation, and a couple of the young guys I was talking to, as we talked about various events, asked me, well, how do you know, because, you know, some of the news out there is pretty rubbish news, and how do you know how to discern or have wisdom on, especially when what we get is very limited, and you can't, and then you can go on the web for sure, which is great, lots of diversity, but how do you figure out what's good news and what's bad news, and just evaluate that whole thing? Now, I wouldn't set up myself as someone who knows everything, because I don't. And sometimes starting off on that point is the best place for a wise person, if you want wise counsel to start, is to know that you don't know everything. And then to take in a variety of information and to evaluate it. Now, I guess if you come at it from a academic point of view, you know, when you do your studies, when you publish something or give a perspective, especially if you've done a master's or a doctorate, there's a peer review process. And the peer review process is supposed to iron out the pros and cons of your proposition. And to some extent that happens around the world, but often we would have 2 or 3 sources of information, and how do we peer review? Because there's such a thing as what I call a circular review, a circular peer review. And what's that? Is that you get all your mates that agree with you and get them to review your point of view. And of course, if it's your mates that agree with your point of view, then you're pretty much going to get a good review, because you've gathered those who are of the same perspective. But a really good peer review is one that has a more holistic perspective. That, yeah, it doesn't stop you from getting friends who agree with you, but you also need to get opposing points of views. And in a proper review process, all those views go into the process to grind and work through the questions and the propositions till you get to something that's more closer to the truth. Now, there's so many examples of this circular review stuff in the world, and it's not hard. I'll just take one off the top of my head. Climate change. It's very interesting. You know, I took geography when I was at school in the late 70s, early 80s. The perspective of geography at that time, what they were teaching was the danger of the ice age. The ice age was coming. And, you know, okay, the ice age is coming. We need to adjust and do things because there's an ice age coming. And those of you who are too young to know that, what are you talking about? Those of you who did schooling in the 70s and early 80s or mid 80s when it changed would remember, yeah, they were pushing this whole ice age narrative. And I accepted it. I thought, okay, we got to be careful of the ice age. Then suddenly, I'm not sure when, might have been the 90s or late 80s, 90s on, this global warming thing came. And the narrative was, no, the earth is not going to freeze in a second ice age, but we're going to get global warming and the earth is going to flood. And that narrative's carried on till today. So what's the truth? And it's interesting to me is the language changed, because if you remember, the language was always, used to be ice age, then it became global warming. And now they've changed it to climate change. Now, what's smart about that title is, guess what? The climate always changes. It's changed from the beginning of time till now. So you can't get it wrong. The climate's going to change. Tomorrow it will be sunny. The day after it will be raining. The climate changes. But what they did by using that narrative is they were covering their butts, and that by using that narrative, if the climate did go to global freezing in the future, then they said, well, there you go. We were right. And a prime example is in Canada, where I used to live. They were pushing this global warming. And in the last year, guess what? One of the coldest winters in history in Canada. And then they came up with a new language called vortex. The polar ice caps are vortexing and moving around. You know, I'm not going to debate that, but what I hate about, you know, it's okay to propose a global freeze or ice age or global warming or something else. I'm not against people proposing all that, because it's just a proposition. But what we need to do, because when an argument says that the science is done, that's a load of rubbish. You know, what they've done is circular reasoning. When it was Ice Age, they got all the people that agreed with the Ice Age and said, okay, the research is done. There's going to be an Ice Age. And for for whatever reason, I don't know why they did it, they changed it to global warming, because we had some warm summers instead of cold summers. So they went, okay, it's warming. And now they've gone to climate change, and even more sinister in Canada and probably in New Zealand, they're pushing the way to solve it. We're going to tax you. We can tax our way out of this problem. That Cortez lady in America, senator, or no, not senator, or whatever she is, politician, she says that the world's going to end in, was it 9 years, 10 years? I forget whatever she said. Maybe it was 20 at the most. We've heard that before. People saying the world's going to end. And I no doubt as a Christian person do believe the world's going to end one day. There'll be a new heavens and a new earth. So I have a biblical perspective on that. But these narratives that are out there, I'm not saying they're wrong to say they're narratives. It's a free world. But as going back to wisdom, we're to allow people to give their narratives, and we need to discern, well, who's telling the truth? And I think I was just using climate change as an example. I mean, there's so many things in this world that, you know, who is telling the truth, and how do we decide that? And what I was saying about circular reasoning. Circular reasoning just gets the people that agree with you, but you don't want anyone to challenge. You don't want any arguments from outside that circle to challenge this truth, because this is the truth, and everything outside this truth is wrong. You know, as a Christian, I found the best people who can critique, let's say, the whole evolution thing, if you believe in that argument, are actually ex-evolutionists. They're brilliant. Why are they so brilliant in critiquing evolution and why evolution is wrong? Because they argued from the other side, and they know the arguments from the other side, and they know where those arguments fail. Those of us who don't believe in evolution, you know, I've never really studied it. So I don't know those arguments. But when I watch professors who support creationism, most of them are ex-evolution people, not Christian all their lives, but they know the arguments. Same with climate change. Watched some really good stuff from scientists who are not, who are well, not even never even believed the original propositions. And again, I don't want to stop people from giving that proposition, but the ones who came from that are able to address every argument because they believe those propositions. So again, wisdom. How do you get wisdom? You got to check whether the view is just circular reasoning. It's whether it's just their people that propose that, and have they gone outside that circle to, you know, in scientific, as they say they're scientific reasoning means you put your proposition there and you let people attack all the angles to see if it's real, if it's true. You know, the latest stuff, and I've mentioned it in some of the other clips that we've made, this whole gender thing, which is really interesting because gender is so scientifically black and white, male, female. You either got two X's or an X and a Y to differentiate between male and female. And the science is so, you know, strong on that, and yet they're just ignoring the science and going for feelings. You can declare if you feel that you're a female and you're a male, or the vice versa, you can just declare that. And because it's about your evolving, gender is fluid. Gender is not fluid. Well, I guess the definition of what people call gender now is fluid. But the male, because they've made it fluid, but the male-female thing is not fluid. You can do the operation and all that, but your DNA is still your DNA. And when they do a DNA test on you, it'll either show you're a male or show you a female, regardless of what you do externally. It's just a biological thing. And science is supposed to be biological, not social constructs. So what they're taking social constructs and they're making them biological facts when they're totally not. So again, circular reasoning it's good to test. You know, even Christianity, one of the reasons Christianity to me stands up so much is because over the years it's been pummeled. People coming at it from other religions or through science, or try to tear down the tenets of the faith. But when you have Christian apologists who argue against that, you know, we've had centuries, we have thousands of years of apologists who have been able to tear down arguments, and a lot of them have come from the other side. So how do you know an argument is true? How do you know a certain piece of news is true? You can't silence all the other voices, because whether you're in communist China, Russia, Europe, America, South America, there's always a tendency to shut down the noise of the other side. This is the only truth. But if it was really true, you're not scared of alternate points of view. You put your point of view there and you say, bring it on. Bring on your alternate point of views. But if you're not strong on your point of view, then you don't want your point of view to be exposed to others, because you feel that your point of view may fail. But if you're supposed to be scientific, if you're supposed to be, like I said, properly peer-reviewed, you're not afraid of that. And you put it there and say, bring it on. So that's how I think you do it. I watch, in terms of news, I watch our local news, which is pretty useless. Comes from a very narrow perspective. So I watch Chinese news. I watch Al Jazeera. I watch some stuff on the social networks. I watch a mixture, and I try and apply that process. Okay, let's take another example. Notre Dame burnt the other day. Now, those of you who are firemen, policemen know that when there's a fire, you don't straight away say the cause, because you don't know. You have to send an investigation team, and then after the investigation, then, you know, that's just SOP, standard operating procedure. So what happened in Notre Dame that made me suspicious? I'm not saying it was something suspicious. Could have been an accident. But there's a lot of funny things that happened. Firstly, they declared right from the beginning that this was an accident. Before any investigation, they said that this was an accident. No conspiracies here. This was an accident. But those of us, anyone who knows standard operating procedures, you don't do that. Even if there's a homicide in New Zealand and you know it's a homicide, you have to wait for the police to declare it's a homicide. They can say suspicious circumstances. They can conclude that it's a suicide or some other cause. But you don't go and say what it is until the investigation is done. So straight away, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I believe in proper procedure. Why would you go ahead and declare there's nothing here when the investigation's not finished? That tells me, I don't blame the police or the firemen or anything. That tells me it was a political decision. I don't know why they made that political decisions. But again, when you do the follow-up, and I did some follow-up research, reading different things, you find out that there's been over 800 churches in France in the past year or so vandalized or burnt, or different things happened to it. You find that I was reading the guy that was in charge of, he was retired now, but is in charge of the architecture and security of the place, talked about how in the 90s, I think, the whole place was rewired and up to date, that they have 24/7 two firemen at the church all the time, 24/7 to review the safety procedure. So they're very careful on accidents or wiring or anything like that. But none of that was mentioned. It was another documentary that was interviewing this guy to get an insider's understanding. And you find that the fire was one on the roof and one in a bell tower, two separate places. That's weird. How can two totally separate places burn? And then you find out that the 800-year roof that was burnt, those of you who know about wood, 800-year hardwood is really hard to burn. It's not flammable like others. It's like steel. It can burn, and it did burn, but it's really hard to burn unless there was some incendiary, But I'll leave that to the experts. I'm just using a couple of examples: climate change, Notre Dame fire, and you can just pull anything from the news. And when you pull something from the news, and whatever perspective it's coming from whatever channel, you put it there. And then you, once you put that argument there, okay, you take it at face value. And then you bring in the other arguments from other news channels, whether it's from a Chinese, Japanese, or whomever, because these days you can access that. And then you get bits of the story that this channel hasn't told. And so that adds to your understanding. So that's how you do it. It's not rocket science. It's any basic academic would know how to do that. Except in today's world, there's agendas. And any researcher knows it's easy to get support and research for some things. Let's say pharmaceuticals, because there's big money on that. But for other things, let's say natural heating products, there's no money in that. Because why would you support research that you can be healed with, say, Manuka honey, lemon and garlic for the common flu is a really good preventative, that's old-fashioned, but it's a really good preventative for those who to stop you from being sick. Why would you put research into that when you can put research money into a pill that I can make millions of dollars because just take this pill and you'll be cured? When in the old days you could take the old-fashioned stuff, no one makes money, but you were healed. So what I'm saying is there's an agenda. American news has American agenda, Russian news, Chinese news has, but that's okay because you bring all these agenda and you put it there, and then you look at it and try and look at the big picture, and then you decide. If you're really interested in knowing the truth, if you just want to buy into somebody's perspective, that's fine too. That's your choice. But if you really want to know the truth, you need to bring all these different perspectives together and look at it and see which argument stands up. Now, as a Christian, you also have a Christian perspective. And if you're looking for wisdom in the Bible, the wisdom books have always been Proverbs, and the other one would be Ecclesiastes. They're wisdom books. They give you, you know, I remember one saying is, how can a fool be wise? And I can't remember the actual, but it's in Proverbs. A fool can be wise by keeping his mouth shut. You know, so I give you all these sayings. They're not answering any specific area, but they're just to help you store up, to help your filter. Because when you get all these sayings, and you know, when you lend money and you borrow money, it tells you that you become a slave. So true. Whether you're an individual or a nation and you just keep borrowing money, you become a slave to the person or the organization that's borrowing it to you. So I would recommend, from a biblical perspective, read the wisdom books, read Proverbs, read Ecclesiastes, just to get some basic principles. Peer review, but not circular peer review. Allow other perspectives, Christian, non-Christian, left, right, center, whatever, to come in, but the true argument should stand. That you know, well, you've done the research and this is the truth. So that's my 2 cents on wisdom. I hope that's helpful. I wouldn't say I was the wisest guy. My wife will tell you, done a lot of mistakes myself. But if I follow the proper process, it should help me decide, okay, that's right and that's wrong. And as people, rather than just jumping in with our opinion, that's the best thing to do, whatever the issue. And I've talked about Israel Folau and Alberta elections recently, Anzac recently. But the perspective, whatever the topic, if I'm going to present a perspective, I need to do some of that homework and think through it myself. And what I have done, at least I mightn't be right, but at least I've presented a perspective that's been somewhat researched rather than just yelling it out without proper research. So that's my perspective, and I just wanted to encourage you. Like I said, read Proverbs, read Ecclesiastes. If you want encouragement, read Psalms. I love the Psalms. It's a very encouraging book. And if you want perspective on time, you know, the prophetic books like Isaiah, they're very Daniel. These books talk about the past, the present, and the future, the coming of Christ. Revelation, of course. There's so much, and I don't want to say I know it all, but I'm scratching the surface, and I'm just giving you some of the tools that I use to scratch the surface. So God bless, have a good night, and we'll keep doing these. It helps me too to think through things when I do these clips and videos, and as I'm working through the issues, I hope that this helps you work through whatever issues that are presenting to you. So again, God bless. See you later.